Hello everyone, welcome back again to the particular session of the model number 2. So in the previous part of the classes, we have gone to know the concept related to smart cities as well as even the clean city. Today let us get to know the concept of safe city. So why the term safe city has come into an existence? Normally, we might have seen many of the mishaps, either maybe there might be the chances of the fire breakage, either due to the intentional or maybe it may be due to the some short circuiting that is taking place, maybe in any of the hospitals or maybe in the form of any of the commercial complexes, there might be the fire would tend to break it out. So in such cases, how we can able to let off the fire? And taking to the another note, we also have even the usage of the internet. At this point of an era, again there is a rate of increase in the cybercrime activities. In addition to this, due to the over exploitation of the resources as well as even the densely populated area, due to the imbalance in the unemployment and overcrowded part of the cities are tending to face some of the social issues. So in order to see that any of the antisocial activities or maybe threatening that is going to tend to cause the threatening to the society, that kind of the city is not called to be as a safer part of the city. Either it may be in terms of some of the forcible part of the punishment to be given for the people who are innocent, or maybe turning up all the what we are going to call it as flagging off onto their any of the disturbance or between any of the communalist or maybe even from one community to another community. These things are getting much more worsened up. So thereby there is a need for a city, apart from the smart, apart from even for the clean city, we need to have a safe city. So safe city, why it is required? So the city which is free from, that means where the amount of the crime rates or maybe even any anti-social activities or the Societal Disturbance Act or maybe any of the mishap that is going to tend to happen, like a fire accidents. Okay. Taking all these things into the considerations, we are going to call it as one which is free. That means we need to have a certain lesser amount of the causing of all these things. So where a particular sect of the society which is free from that to the crime rates that and which is a minimal in nature, and antisocial activities are also less, and then even the societal disturbance or the miscreants will be going to tend to cause. So that kind of the city we don't want it. We want only the city which tend to give much more protection, so free from all these ailments, which in turn tend to give protection and safeguard against the all odds is what we are going to call it as the safe city. So what are the things or the necessary measures that we go for requiring in the case of the safe city? The necessary measures or the salient features means, first of all, we need to have the controlling of the crime rates. Thereby, a safe city shall tend to consist of some of the following aspect. First of all, if you're going to see that it has to be much more secured in nature. Okay, so the residential or maybe any of the people, so thereby we come across the people need to be secured enough, where even during the night times they need to be secured. What happens in olden days, at the dawn as well as at the part of the rise of the sun, and then when the sun used to set, the doors were closed. The doors were not open, only on during the sunrise time. But in today's part of the society, everything has changed due to the technological advancements. Thereby, people need to be secured. So, even if they are walking alone, so nobody shall go for having any crime like a snatching of all the chains or any other snatching away all their money. Such kind of an activities shall not tend to prevail. And for that, you need to have a proper surveillance, that too by the usage of the CCTV cameras that has to record in all the part of the street. That is what is required here. And then the police forces, we call it as a police protection force, they need to have a roundup on an alternative days also, as well as a visit during the night times, as well as not only during the night times, even across in the day times. Because in the news as well as any of the media, we might get to see that at the late morning only some people or robbers or the gang of the members, they came, they have murdered up and they have snatched away whatever the items what they get to know. So we should not go for giving the way for all such kind of things. So in that particular manner, we need to say that the safety aspects, whatever the living area and the police protection force shall tend to have a regular monitoring. As well as these police protection force, what they are going to do, they go for having the 1 week safety programs, okay, related to creating an awareness among the public. So we have the public safety programs. One more thing in the case of the safest part of the city means the threat, or to get to see by the aid of the intelligence agency, they might be able to track whatever the antisocial activities that are taking place, maybe an entry of a terrorist. You might have seen in the case of an IASC attack, as well as even in the case of the Mumbai attack. So how they have escaped, and in the Mumbai attack, so what has happened, you have witnessed. So thereby, in order to see that, several measures has to be taken in order to make that to be self-reliant. Thereby, even the army forces are kept. You might have seen in the case of the Jammu and Kashmir also. So there, how does the citizens will tend to survive? And all these things, if you're going to take it across, the laws are to be made much more strict. Only then the people will tend, some of the people, not all of them, some of the people will tend to learn some kind of the lesson. So immediate tracking as well as the punishment has to be given in the trial run of the court. And they should also tend to see that the mental disturbances are to be minimal. Because nowadays we have mental disorders, psychopaths. So due to the some of the growth in the socialistic part of an environment which are not favorable for them, they will be going to join the hands. Either they go for blasting of any of the train or maybe the buses, or keeping some bomb in any of the places. Sometimes they also get, the police forces will also tend to get the hoax bomb calls. Okay. So, these are the aspects to be controlled, because these are the challenging one. So, thereby an intelligence agency shall also tend to see that the regular monitoring as well as an analysis are to be made. That is why they will be going to cut hold of that particular person there immediately, because they go for having the senses where, and they go for tracking the movement, okay, of the criminals. So, they may create a dramas or any other scenes that nowadays we can also see in the Mysore-Bangalore highway, right. So, apart from the city, if you are going to enter into the rural part of the area where there is no any of the persons who are there in the road, so what kind of security to be provided, and that is what the big question that we have. So, thereby again the CCTVs has to be installed and it has to be regularly monitored. Even the army forces have to be made to be placed in a mandatory manner. They need to have a proper check force, because what happens, you can see there are some smuggling of the goods or any other things. So, in that cases, some of the people or the miscreants will tend to manipulate, and then they will be going to tend to escape. That should not tend to happen. And so, the tracking of the movement of the materials, as well as they should also tend to reduce the antisocial activities. Okay. So, this kind of the things have to be there. And then what about the fire? If it is going to tend to break down, you need to have a fire station. So, we call it as a fire fighting station, mainly to see that if any of the fire is broke out, immediately it is going to get through the sensors, as well as immediately the emergency call is picked up. So, the emergency response team personnel will tend to be there within a span of certain minutes, and then they will be going to have their team to lit off the fire. Okay. So, that the security is tend to prevail, and even the cyber crimes awareness has to be given up. Only then we come across for the aspect of the safe city. So, this is an essential thing that we have to get to come across, that in the case of the safe part of the city. I hope you people might have understood the what are the features, as well as mainly we need to see that the society should get a comfortable environment, and it should not be under some of the threatening aspect by the influential part of the people. So, that is a major considerations we have. The next concept we have energy efficient buildings. What is meant by energy efficient buildings? Energy efficient buildings are the one which will tend to use lesser amount of the energy than the conventional buildings that they go for using the high range or the high amount of the energy, and thereby upon the usage of the materials are also to be in an environmentally friendly, where the emission of the carbon dioxide or in the form of the carbon related compounds, that will be going to be reduced. So, as per the 2021 the climatic change conference, they are majorly intended to give a top priority for the establishment of the energy efficient buildings. Reason here is the conventional mode of the buildings, there is a huge amount of the energy that is required, as well as even the proper planning has to be done. Sometimes what happens, due to the customizable factors, some of the things are built up in an unscientific manner. So when the things are built up in an unscientific manner, what happens that eventually tend to create other problems. So either the ventilation is not in a proper manner, you need to add one more lights or lighting arrangements are required. The solar energy or the radiations are to be made to enter into that, as well as the heating as well as an insulation components are not done in a proper manner. If at all, if the usage of the non-renewable energy resources are getting much more higher and higher, in all those aspects the cost that is incurred will also be high. And one more thing I wanted to say here, in the case of the energy efficient buildings means, even whatever the waste materials that are coming across, that should also be managed in an effective manner. Then only we come across the case of the energy which you are going to use it, it has to be less enough. So let us get to know what are the phases. See, any of the building construction if you are going to take, we have the pre-construction phase, we have even the post-construction phase that we are going to call it as a constructional phase. And we also call it as operational phase. So in the case of the pre-construction, if at all if any of the buildings have to be built, thereby when you compare the conventional energy usages as well as the conventional buildings, you get to see what are the ratings and how much amount of the energy is getting wasted up. So where we can able to reduce the unnecessary usage of the energy. So thereby we need to have a proper plan, especially you need to have the proper site selection. Proper site selection, and again in the case of the proper site selection, mainly related to where is the location, it may be in terms of an geographical location, and then what is the sunlight and what is the surrounding climatic conditions. Whether you are staying in a cold climatic conditions or maybe in terms of an hot climatic conditions, that depends mainly upon the usage of the materials. And thereby whatever the materials that you are going to take it, these materials shall tend to emit the less amount of the carbon. Okay, that is one more important thing, less amount of the carbon dioxide emissions. Otherwise, it is going to add much more to the footprint, thereby increasing the climatic changes. And the next important aspect is, in the case of the construction, how does the heating, vacuum as well as an air conditioning systems are given up? How the designing strategy, that what we are going to call it as a passive solar design strategy, how it is to be made up. And in certain situations, in the case of the conventional buildings, we might also see that there is an annoyance due to the presence of the sound, and that should also be reduced. In all this aspect, if at all if we wanted to get to reduce it, means thereby we have to be mainly relying upon what is the standard codes of the practices that is given either by the Indian Green Building Council as well as even from the, we come across the Griha, that is the rating assessment, and then we also have other notable bodies or the authorities which will tend to have the checklist where such kind of an buildings are called as an energy efficient buildings. So in all this regard, in the case of an operation, what happens where there is an accommodation. So when there is an accommodation, there might be maybe in the case of the office places or maybe in the case of any of the residential or maybe the commercial complex only. Let us take for it as an example. So, that accommodation, whether they have the complete live accommodation or at what is the rate at which the people will be going to stay and then work there. So, what are the things the people will not tend to work? Say for example, if you are going to take in the case of an IT company, so Saturdays as well as Sundays will be treated as an holiday. Not all the IT companies, some of them. And in other such cases, they have their own part of the shift, whether it might be a morning or maybe night shift. That means they have to take along with what is the daylight that is coming across. How much amount of the heat is required. Sometimes what happens, if the buildings will tend to absorb more and more amount of the solar radiations, there might be the chances of the rising of the heat. And the portion where the insulation materials that are to be covered up, if it is not given in a proper manner, that going to create another set of the problem. Hence, based upon the conventional energy sources or the conventional building practices, now there is a time for having the energy efficient type of the buildings. In the case of energy efficient type of the buildings, what are the considerations or what are the salient features? Let us get to know one by one. Mainly energy efficiency means use of less energy. Use of less energy. They need to make the buildings to be thermally comfortable. And to reduce the amount of the air pollution. In the case of the energy efficient type of the buildings, the first criteria, they need to have the passive solar design aspects. What do you mean by the term passive solar design aspects? The passive solar design aspect is mainly intended to have the proper penetration of the solar radiation. That means where the encroachment of the solar radiation is taking place inside the building, as well as the minimal amount of the heating. That too, in India, if you are going to take the tropical climate, thereby there is a changes in the humidity, as well as the surrounding temperature is also getting changed. So, in order to withstand against any of the climatic changes, we need to have the passive solar designing aspect, where there is a balancing in the solar radiations, which is going to tend to get reflected as well as refracted there. So, for that we need to go for providing the proper ventilation aspect, as well as you can also see in the picture. So, what is the orientation of the building, as well as what are the glass fixtures that has to be given. Sometimes there is a entrapment of the solar radiation, and in the cases where you go for providing the doors as well as the windows, so cross ventilation has to be properly provided, and the noise that is going to tend to cause an annoyance, that has to be reduced here by using some of the sound absorbing equipments. And then we also come across for utilization of embedded energy materials. The utilization of the usage of the low energy embedded building materials. So, the alternative building materials, again we have a list that again you can able to see what are the components. So, upon absorbing all these components or the materials, thereby they are going to absorb certain amount of the carbon dioxide instead of the emitting of the carbon dioxide. So, this is where the difference is that we go for giving it, because there is a release of the huge amount of the carbon dioxide emission, that intense it is going to have an impact that is literally tending to cause the climatic change. So, thereby when you go for using the low energy embedded part of the materials to the building materials. Obviously, it is also be having the specifications as per the industrial norms as well as the construction set of the practices they need to follow, and by the usage we can also cut down some of the unnecessary amount of the energy or the expenses. So, thereby one thing is passive solar designing strategies, and second one is mainly the usage of the materials that you go for taking for the construction. The third important aspect is usage of the energy efficient equipment. In the case of the usage of energy efficient equipment, maybe sensors are utilized here nowadays. In addition to that, the solar panels are getting used nowadays for the sustainment of the energy. That too, the even the case of the usage of the renewable sources of energy also we can able to quote it here. In the case of the renewable sources of energy, mainly usage of the solar power panels as well as the small scale wind turbines can also be utilized, so that apart from the usage of the conventional electricity mode, we can also have the certain percentage of the self-reliant, mainly in the case of the large storage buildings. In the case of the small storage buildings, sometimes what happens, all the solar power lighting systems or maybe the wind energy lighting systems can also be provided, which can able to harness the self-sustaining and thriving part of an energy across from any of the drop in power fluctuations. So, that can also be done, and that too in the so complete aspect of the photovoltaic cells and the electrification process will tend to reduce an impact, and thereby by the usage of the energy efficiency equipments, it is reliant that they will also tend to reduce unnecessary medical expenses, because we can see in the outside the air pollution, unknowingly we will tend to neglect the concept of the indoor air pollution, because in the indoor there will be exposure of the varieties of the volatile organic compounds, and their emissions unknowingly will be going to tend to inhale it, either maybe from the paint or maybe from the kitchen or maybe from any of the things where there is some of the combustion process that is taking place. Okay, that will tend to have an impact. Thereby unnecessary part of the medical expenses can be reduced, and it will also tend to save the life as well as even the cost of the health that mainly intended to keeping up and paying up for the hospitals. So, that has to be reduced. So, these are all the salient features of the energy efficient buildings, because providing the comfortability to environment, to the human, as well as to providing the safety consideration and to promote the health amongst the people who are residing there in the operational phase of the building. That too by using the renewable energy resources in an efficient manner, as well as by using some of the reliant energy equipments. So, this is what we come across in the case of energy efficient type of the buildings. I hope you might have understood this part of the concept. Moving on for the next part of the concept, that is recycling in the case of the built environment. Why this recycling is necessary? Under the umbrella of the sustainable development, we have come across the various goals. So, life on the land, life below water, and innovation, and as well as even the cases of the sustainable cities. In order to see that if the cities have to become much more sustainable, then whatever the problems what the city is getting to face or the society is going to get to face, that has to be reduced in one or the other manner. Need to provide the socio-economic part of the solution, as well as socio-scientific aspect to be inculcated, or it has to be adopted, of which we can able to see the problems in the case of activities where huge amount of the materials, what we go for using the type of the materials starting from whatever the toothpaste or the brushes till whatever the things that we go for consume it, maybe the food materials or the packets, or maybe even the clothes, or maybe any other gadgets, everything will be going to turn up as a waste one or the other day. Perhaps the gap that has to be reduced in such a manner that the solutions are to be provided in an innovative manner. Still, there are boundaries that have been kept as a gap between the waste not being treated as a resource and the waste being treated as a resource. So, whenever the waste means which is a discarded items which is of no longer of the use, but as per the today's perspective, even some kind of the waste, if it is not at all to be used, somewhat is going to tend to get in the landfill. So, whatever the solid materials that you are going to take it, there we come across for the recycling aspect. Even the wastewater now arising in the case of the any of the cities or the towns, that has to be reused as well as recycled. Best example that we come across in the case of Singapore region. And then next, in the case of the recycling, why it is necessary? Recycling, it is necessary in such a manner that whenever the material is getting up, or in the case where a new set of the materials are to be utilized, so in such cases we go for adapting the waste part of the materials, which can also be reconsidered here in the form of the useful manner, that too in the useful part of the raw material. Thereby, one such kind of the concept here is to reduce the unnecessary usage of the minerals as well as the resources. That too here, if you are going to take it, reconstruction of the building into new ones. When you have the reconstruction of the building into new ones, of course, when the other part of the materials, it may be a bricks or maybe the aggregates or the glass, steel, the fiber content, okay. So, which is meant for the roofing as well as even for the beams as well as even in the case of the columns. Whatever the steel materials that are used, again it can be reused. It cannot be treated as a waste material. So, that can be taken for other set of the construction purpose. That is what we come across, reconstruction of the building into the new ones. You use the same materials there, and remaining things it is subjected for recycling. That is why they are also going to come across the concept of recycled coarse aggregate. We also have a recycled plastic. So, plastic where, because nowadays it is going to cause a mess, but how to provide the solution? There are certain ways where the plastics can also be reused in some other manner and recycled up. Only some set of the plastics can be recycled, as I told in an earlier basis. Not all the plastics are recyclable in nature. So, the thermoplastics are recyclable. Thermosetting, it is always having a problem. So, they cannot be easily converted in terms of any other feasible manner. The next important aspect is again the usage of the next important aspect is again usage of the wood material, as well as when you come across for the remodeling of the buildings, the walls or any other things, partially when it is utilized or partially when it has to be subjected for certain changes or certain modifications. There also for the construction of the walls and everything, part of the used materials can be utilized there. That means the next aspect that we come across here, it is the segregation of the waste. Nowadays the waste segregation is an important criteria, because if you are going to take in the case of the solid waste, there is a formation of the wet waste as well as a dry waste. So wet waste, what does it mainly prefer? Whatever the degradable aspect, whatever the soiled up or any other the sanitary waste that is coming across, they are all under the category of the wet waste. In the case of the dry waste, completely dry paper or maybe any other cardboard sheet, metals, plastics, glass and any other metals or fiber components, they come under the category of the dry waste. Now when they are mixed to each other, obviously it becomes a difficult part, and thereby the segregation is not an easier manner. So when the waste is getting generated, obviously it has to be segregated at the source itself. When it is segregated at the source itself, thereby the extra amount of the energy that is required or the labor time, it can be yet reduced. Otherwise it is going to tend to kill the time as well as an energy for that. So in such a manner we can able to segregate the waste, and the waste which are even household hazardous, that should also be segregated. That is essential. Any of the paints, solvents or any of the polishes, so these are said to be known as a household hazardous materials. Now coming on for the next one, that is tuning up with the local recycling center. Obviously what they are going to do, for example at home you have lots of newspapers, so if you are going to give it to them, they will be going to recycle it. Any of the waste plastic materials are available, they go for taking it up, so they will be going to buy the materials and then they subject it for the recycling purpose. Likewise we need to have that related to the local recycling centers. Their major work is to recycle all such kind of the articles or any of the materials and turn up into the useful forms. And several factories have also been built up in the manner for the recycling, maybe for the paper as well as even for the plastic. So why it is required? Because instead of piling up of a huge amount of the waste, if it is sent to the recycling center, they will be going to tend to take care of that. And that is the major motto behind the tuning up with the role of that too in the case of the local recycling centers. So have to be identified in a proper manner and given there. Next, reduction of the hazardous waste. See, hazardous waste, these are the substances, either they tend to possess any of the four characteristics, either ignitability, able to catch up the fire, corrosivity, which will tend to cause a corrosion to the metals or any other thing, and then reactivity, which is going to tend to react and release obnoxious odor as well as the toxic odors, the smell is going to be produced, and toxicity, that means which is harmful to the human health. So in all such cases, one or the other manner, we are also using the hazardous materials, knowingly or unknowingly. For example, if I wanted to give you what are the household hazardous materials, even what is the bacon spray as well as the ant powder that you are going to take it. So you just see the back side of it, there they will be going to have the rhombus shape, whether it is written poison or not. Take it from me. So these are the materials, again they will be going to get to see that the deodorant sprays are there, that will tend to contain some of the flammable entities. So till the usage it is not like an hazardous, so that it is not mixed with any other thing. When the hazardous substances are mixed with the non-hazardous normal solid waste, it becomes very difficult to remove them, and thereby hazardous waste landfill is only completely a separate task. Majorly hazardous waste producers are from the industries as well as even from the commercial complexes. So, apart from the residential, mainly the hazardous substances has to be reduced. Thereby how we can able to reduce it? So, replacing in the case of the industrial production only by reducing the amount of the hazardous content either in the form of the heavy metals or maybe like a pesticides or insecticides, all the components, all those some of the organic compounds which are found to be non-biodegradable in the nature, which is tending to cause an impact onto the aquatic systems or onto the vegetation, or by the virtue of the human consumption, what happens, it is ultimately tend to get deposited. So, that we have to reduce it. So, this is a alarming part of the situation what we are going to face it. The next thing it is adopt deconstruction and demolition. And demolition means whatever the waste that you go for taking it, whatever the demolished part of the waste, if a building is demolished by the usage of some of the blasting equipments or detonating equipments, then later onwards the building debris what is present there, from that at least we can able to utilize some of the essentialities, and that is where we can able to see that the construction materials are also available there, from them we can able to extract it. The form of an extraction is what we are going to call it as the demolished part of the materials or the deconstructed part of the materials can have the can have the basis to serve mainly as a raw materials for other building construction purpose. So, this in turn will tend to reduce the unnecessary amount of the generation of the new set of the materials, thereby we can able to limit the amount of the consumption of the resources. So, thereby from the recycling, what are the advantages that we come across? Obviously, we can able to reduce the load of land pollution, and thereby we can also reduce the load on the waste disposal treatment facilities. One, we can able to conserve the natural resources. With the conservation of the natural resources, majorly we can able to limit the amount of the wastage of resources. This is what the circular economy in the case of the sustainability has an expedition in the case of sustainable developmental goals. I hope you people have understood the concept of recycling also.